Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on grain drying, storage and pest management, and one of our monthly AHDB cereals and oilseeds webinars. A really interesting topic. Hopefully you're joining us from somewhere nice and sunny around the country, or dark, murky Scotland, which is where Philip's joining us from tonight. We're really pleased that we've got Philip Darke from Camgrain and Martin Cobbald that's joining me tonight to talk you through all you need to know about grain drying, storage and managing your pests in store. Hopefully ahead of the season ahead, but actually relevant at any time of the year that you've got grain in storage or got stores on farm there ready to inspect and get ready for grain to be stored. So just to talk you through tonight and for some housekeeping to start with, you're all on mute, sadly we can't see you or hear you, but you can definitely get in touch with us. If you use the questions box on your panel, if you've got the screen like the one there, there's just a questions box under there. If you type that in, then myself and my colleague Christian, who sat behind the screen, can see that, and I can pose any questions then to Martin and to Philip. If we're planning on being here till 8:15 tonight in order to give you plenty of opportunity to answer any questions, so we'll make sure we have a prompt finish at 8:15, and the session is being recorded, so if you wanted to watch anything back or share it with friends or colleagues on farm, we'll make sure that's available on the YouTube channel and you'll get the recording sent to you directly as well. If you want to share what's going on tonight, our Twitter handles are all there, for Camgrain, for Philip, Dealey Pest for Martin, and myself and AHDB cereals there as well. So just to run you through basis and rosto points, so we've got one basis and one rosto point available for tonight. If you'd like to claim those points in that questions box, if you pop your name, your basis account number and your postcode, or your name, your Naroso member number and your date of birth and postcode for Naroso, Christian and I will then register those for you. If you're watching this back, if you send an email to teresa.meadows@ahdb.org.uk, I'll make sure those points are registered for you as well. So the plan tonight is we're going to just do a couple of polls to see who's out there and see what you're currently thinking about grain storage. I'm then going to hand over to Philip Darke, who's kindly going to talk us through some practical kind of tips, things to think about on grain storage and management. And then Martin Cobbald is going to talk us through the great myths of grain storage insects, and both presentations prove to be really interesting tonight. We'll then have some questions and discussion, and we'll finish, like I said, and close at 8:15. So just as an introduction to tonight, I guess grain storage is something that kind of happens in some ways. I think we spend a lot of time in the industry talking about soils or varieties or fungicides or everything that happens in the field up to getting it into store, and then we put it into store and we cross our fingers and hope that when we take it off on a lorry it's all going to be right. And I think tonight hopefully is some of the principles, some of the best practice, some of the ideas to think about in order that we can have safe, effective storage, that you keep those premiums and keep those stores in good health, so that your crop goes off farm in the best condition that it can. So just to give us an idea of who we've got joining us tonight, and we've got a couple of polls. So Christian, if you'd like to launch the first poll for us. The first question, to give Philip a bit of an idea of who we've got, could you just tell us what kind of storage you have on farm? So if you click on the screen in front of you, you should be able to select bulk storage, either silo or bin storage, cooperative storage, or a combination of those. So we'll just kind of do voting. We've got just over half of you voted now, so we'll have a look and see what we've got. Okay, Christian, if you want to share the results, this will be good for you. Philip, so the majority of those here tonight have got bulk storage, so 69% in bulk. We've got a few that have got silos and bins, a few that are joining us with a cooperative angle, and a few that have got a combination between them. So bulk storage is the name of the game tonight, and that fits in well, Philip, doesn't it, for what you're going to talk us through in a bit. Brilliant.
So.
And then definitely. And then similarly for Martin, just really interested how you treat your store with an insecticide. Do you do it yourself? Do you get a contractor to do it? have you never done it before, or do you only do it when you've got a problem? And again, just to give us an idea of what you do and how you do it, and then Martin can pick up on some of those and some of the questions you've got later. So we've got most of you are there joining us, maybe with a cold drink or a beer in hand tonight. So Christian, maybe we've got most people voting now. Do you want to share the results? So here we go, Martin. So quite a split actually. Most people doing it themselves, but a fair few getting a contractor to do it, a fair few haven't done it before, and a fair few also doing it when they've got a problem. So a real mixture there, Martin. So you've got to appeal to all audiences there, and for yours later. But yeah, that will be great for your presentation. So without further ado, we're going to get straight into the presentation. So if we hand over to Philip. Philip is now going to run us through his presentation, which is all about the principles to think about when you get to harvest, and then about grain drying and grain cooling on farm as well. So Philip is Operations Director at Camgrain, comes to us with a lot of experience and is going to talk to you about the principles for an on-farm situation. So over to you, Philip. Thank you very much.
Super. Hi, everybody. I haven't done this before, talking to a computer, but I'm sure you're all friendly out there. I'd just like to thank the McDonald's up here near our Braith for lending me their office this evening. We're up from Cambridge a couple of days, and we needed a nice, powerful broadband connection to do this. So thanks to McDonald's, thanks for AHDB for giving me the chance to talk. Possibly a little bit about myself before I move into the talk. I've been with Camgrain now since 1983 after doing engineering at college. We were a 10,000 tonne grain store then. And over the last 35 years, it's grown the Camgrain operation into more than 500,000 tonnes of grain storage. We store all types of crops, linseed, peas, wheat, barley, everything that really goes inside a combine. And our storage is a combination of flat storage, silo storage. Our silos vary from 100 tonnes up to 6,500 tonnes. And our flat stores range up to a single bulk of 70,000 tonnes. So we've got a large combination of types of storage, volumes. So I'll try and give you a whistle-stop tour now of some of the suggestions that I'd give personally with some of my experience, and hopefully will be helpful to you all. Possibly the first thing many of you would look at is your variety selection. What am I growing? Malting barley, milling wheat, feed wheat, human consumption peas or beans or linseed. That variety selection is crucially linked to harvesting timing, what your combine capacity is, how much your combine's got to do, because clearly to grow a quality crop across the whole farm and expect quality to be the same at the end of harvest is pretty unusual compared to with your average harvest conditions. How much crop have you got to harvest wet? How much can you harvest dry? The target market, premiums, feed, combination of both, and then the actual variety selection that you take, and how really robust is the crop at maintaining germination or Hagberg. So once you're into some of the premium crops, really you need, whether you're on a group 3 or a group 4, soft or hard, or a group 1 or 2, you're looking prompt combining. Ideally you would target within 7 days of the crop being fit to go, and in an average year you'd hope perhaps within a fortnight to have all your quality crops, if you're talking just wheat, out of the way. and obviously the longer it's in the field, it's exposed to weather and the vagaries of the UK climate. So for your storage systems that you want to operate, as I've said, that's going to depend really on what the farm is growing. Just flag all the issues. Wet harvests. I think, you know, I'm from a farming family, know how frustrating it is sitting on the side of a field with a combine that you can't go. And with quality crops, if you can cut them wet, get them safely in the barn, it is much better than the worry of sitting around waiting, hoping the Hagberg retention is still going to be there when you get back into the field. So for your own storage solutions, what are they capable of taking off these big combines? How do you manage it when it's in your flat store or silo until you've got the grain dry? Store cleaning down program, crucial that is done in a timely manner before harvest. Your use of pre and post harvest chemicals for storage, it's all a consideration. And you know, with many of us that are storing grain over longer periods now, that window that you have between the store being empty, getting it cleaned down and getting it ready for harvest again, sometimes isn't quite as big as you would like. Laboratory and sample procedures. For all the time I've been storing grain and working with grain, attention to detail with your sample procedures, your analysis, what your moisture contents are, and getting that accurately and properly calibrated. So important to filling bulks and making sure when probably many farmers get to the end of their drilling program, which is a real busy time after you've cut the crop and you go to the barn, everything is right inside the barn. What you put in the barn, if it's carefully sampled as it's going in and you know what's in there, you'll know how to manage it. Segregation also very important depending on the type of crop that you're growing, again, and whether you're segregating proteins, moistures, varieties. The more segregation you have, probably the better, but obviously some of the stores that you have will have limited segregation and you tend to grow bulks that fit those levels of segregation. So grain drying options, 3 basic options, and I just see from those that are on tonight's call, a lot of you will be possibly using a combination of near ambient air drying or possibly using relative humidity and ambient relative humidity. For Camgrain's model, the majority of our grain will be high temperature dried, and we have large capacity dryers capable of dealing with some pretty big volumes, as you can imagine. 500 farmers in Camgrain. We need to take in a day's combining and then have it ready for the next day. Coming back to the farm situation, your drying capacity needs to, or your holding capacity needs to match what your combine's capable of delivering in a day. As far as which method is best, they all have benefits. Probably with the dry grain using relative humidity, the biggest shortfall of that is really difficult weather, probably in the autumn, and a wet autumn and damp air conditions that mean you're still trying to dry grain when you get approaching Christmas. High temperature drying advantage also would be you would be able to sell grain for August, September movement, and you would know it's going to be dry, and then you can do it quickly. Near ambient, a slightly slower process, less risk of damaging the grain with high temperature, but still a slower process, one that needs to be tailored to how you market your grain. Bulk drying, really picked up how long to dry. Some great systems out there now with stirrers that keep a nice even relative humidity and moisture throughout the bulk, which is probably 20 years ago these systems came in, and from the difficulties of a big mass that doesn't move around to a combination of stirrers and flat storage and well ventilated sheds. Some really great systems that work, that you can deliver product and have it ready in good time. Monitoring of the bulks is obviously crucial, particularly when temperatures are high and it's coming from direct from harvest temperatures, 30 degrees. Insects love high temperature, they love moisture, and possibly after harvest, the most crucial time you're looking at the crop is also when you're very busy drilling and getting next year's crop in the ground. Temperature monitoring methods. Ideally, we would all have pretty automated systems, but clearly that's not possible for everyone, and some of the flat store bulks that we have don't rely on automated systems. So many silo systems will give you a readout all over the silo or over the flat store, and if you're in shallower bulks, handheld spears do a great job. Calibration of the systems, really important. It's really very easy to think that my temperature probe will never go wrong, but simply just the monitoring of your temperature probe against ambient air gives you a good guide to how accurate it is. High temperature grain drying, to move on that from bulks. Most important thing with high temperature drying is probably to match the pre-drying storage level and how you're going to hold the grain before it passes onto the dryer, and the amount of segregation you've got for pre-drying storage. Ideally, it's ventilated. Large capacity allows the combines to roar away all day, and then as you're feeding it in a measured way into the dryer. Dryer output and capacity, simply a calculation of related to your combine capacity and also the moistures you wish to go at. As an example, with Camgrain, we would really have our dryers set up so if our farmer members wanted to go at 23, 24, or even 25, it's got the capacity to deal with that, particularly if people are chasing quality. Training and operation of these big dryers is crucial. Doesn't want to be just grabbing the dryer manual just before harvest and hoping you've got it right. Fuel is very expensive, as we know, and we operate all our tractors and lorries and vehicles connected with the farm in an efficient way, and grain dryers are no different. A good operator will run the dryer quicker, more efficiently, and in a safer fashion. Servicing and preparation of the dryer we see is really crucial. That it's all too easy to leave a big continuous mixed flow dryer sitting around since previous harvest, and then turn it on and off you go. Cleaning out the dryers, absolutely crucial. For grain hanging up inside the dryers over winter. Once you fire your dryer up and you've got a mixed flow column moving through, if any of that is hung up in the dryer, the burners will be pointing at that throughout the period of drying, and will lead to a fire ultimately in that sort of situation. Another thing that we've really noticed over probably many years is farmers that have insect infestations on really early on in harvest, and you don't think the grain has had long enough time to actually been in store to pick up an infestation. And on quite a few occasions, we've just aware either they're grain left in a combine from the previous harvest, or grain inside a dryer that hasn't been cleaned out properly. Calibration of the burners, critical with big mixed flow dryers. or any mixed flow dryers, you don't want fuel fumes going into the dryer, and you want maximum fuel efficiency. Temperature gauges, again, the same with the temperature probes that you're using to test the bulks. The gauges on the dryers most definitely need to be calibrated carefully to ensure you don't overheat the grain effectively by mistake. Mixed flow dryers and high temperature dryers also, it is very easy to, as the grain moistures go up, to keep slowing the dryer down. There is a point when you'll reach when the dryer is going too slow, and it's very easy to then have a dryer fire. So there are times when you need to know the ability of your own dryer and at what point you should look to dry twice. It can be a real aggravation to do it because you've got to put the grain into bulk and then bring it out again. But dryers want a nice steady flow of moisture where possible, and not trying to bite off too much in one hit. So post-dryer action, this applies whether it's coming out the dryer or some of these, whether it's coming straight from the field. Any grain that's sitting at 30 degrees, which is probably the temperature you're likely to exit from a dryer, or possibly, you know, when we have a warm harvest coming off the field at that sort of temperature, you need to get the temperature down as soon as possible, and also use the power and manage the power carefully for driving temperature down with a reasonably high temperature differential. So you're not blowing at 29 degrees and trying to move grain from 30 to 29. You're ideally got a 5+ degree difference in temperature and trying to drive the temperature down quicker, which is more fuel efficient. As far as when you're blowing silos or bulks, if you're in a very large bulk, and an example of that would probably be our 70,000 ton bulk that we have in one of our flat stores, it takes 2 or 3 days for that temperature front to move right through the bulk, and just careful monitoring of when you do and don't blow, so that you don't leave a temperature front for a long period halfway through either a silo or a big flat storage column of grain. Avoid sweating in the silos, flat stores, so it's good ventilation through the silo roof or flat store. Dripping moisture back onto the top of a silo is a great way to start an insect infestation. Something that probably all of us would want to take certainly into account is how long you intend to store. Whether it's 1 month and you've got an October sale, you're drying it quickly and you're moving it on, and then the temperature of the stored grain isn't quite so important. So 15 or 16 degrees, even 20 degrees is not an issue. Longer term storage, or even if you're over yearing, drying the grain, for example, with malting barley, you'd be drying down to less than 12% moisture, and you'd probably be aiming at less than 10 degrees centigrade. For our wheats, we're aiming at 5 degrees for long-term storage. We don't try to push malting barley down to the same level. So covered ventilation soon as possible after harvest, and have a reasonable differential between your air temperature that you're blowing and that of the grain. Trying to avoid also large moisture variations within the bulks. So if you're struggling to control the moisture going into the dryer, it can often be quite a struggle to control the moisture coming out of a dryer. And where you've got those cases, ventilation is really important to unify the moisture. Which method would I personally recommend or suggest that is used, either upward ventilation or downward ventilation? My personal preference for many years has been to blow. Could be considered the traditional method. Our silos and flat stores will all blow. I like the idea of PC traps and bug traps on the top of the bulks, and as you blow that warm air through the bulk, it rises to the top, and it's a great opportunity to check bug traps and also make sure everything smells okay. Downward ventilation, you can obviously smell at the exit fan, but it does also introduce the possibility of drawing damp grain onto the top of the bulk, which with upward ventilation through an axial fan, you get an element of air drying as you go through that fan, which is a gain, and you don't tend to get the same dampness appear on the surface of the bulk. So you see the slides are shown there with a silo, just showing how that cool air moves through a silo, and the length of time that takes to happen is very dependent on the size of the silo, but it is something that you can monitor very well with temperature monitoring that runs throughout the bulk to show you the temperature front moving through the bulk, where it's a silo or flat store. Safe storage, these charts are available, and you can see in the red it's the zone not to be, and the green zone is where you want to be. Bulk capping mold formations really shows where the temperature front hasn't moved through the grain properly, and the issues that generates in the silo. And on the picture on the right, you can see issues with damp on the surface. Store hygiene, just to move quickly onto that so I don't overrun on time. Conveying systems, great place to start issues with insects or fungus, so clean the conveyor systems out well. Managing bulks, something that we do, and you'll certainly do if you're using stirrers with your bulks, is level heaps of grain are much easier to manage because you've got an even depth for ventilation. We certainly draw cores through our silos and our flat store bulks that have underground discharge to check grain quality. Moisture measurement, critical to what you're doing for storage. So the use of an oven method with either your merchant or cooperative, checking your moisture meters that they're accurate. If you don't want to put something in there thinking your moisture meter is bang on accurate, you haven't checked it, and then you finish up with a bulk after harvest, not at 14.5 moisture, but at 16.5, which is obviously not the place to be. Monitoring, record keeping, temperature spears. I've really covered the different sophisticated systems that you can have. Camgrain, we operate Barnell, Robidome, various systems, and we use temperature spears. They're great systems and give great peace of mind, and actually enable you to manage the aeration of the bulks in the most efficient manner. And we're using pitfall traps and bug traps on all the surfaces of our grain. Plant inspection and servicing. Many a time, I mean, my sister farms, and we've got farming connections throughout the family, and there are a lot of times when you go to that dryer and the control panel hasn't been opened since the end of last harvest, and the mice have got inside it. So control panels, give them a thorough check, certainly whether you're seeing it yourselves on farm, but some of the spares that we require for this harvest, certainly Camgrain is putting in a program of carrying more critical spares because of the difficulty getting some parts, whether that's Brexit or other issues. But we're certainly carrying critical parts, making sure conveyors are well serviced and the plant has been thoroughly run and checked. Gearbox oils, often completely forgotten gearboxes, but a careful check of gearboxes each year and the changing of the oil will make the machines last much longer and blow the dust off the motors. Just a few slides here for show you some of the very recent things we've seen on silos. The picture to the left shows a silo sheet that looks perfectly fine. The picture in the middle shows the corrosion on that sheet on the other side, that it is where the internal stiffener on the silo has gathered moisture. And then in the picture to the right actually shows the failed silo sheet. This is the same picture again here of silo from the inside. You can see the little bit of daylight there, and you can actually see the sheet to the right has actually failed. So really important the inspection of your silos, and similarly with flat stores with the concrete thrust walling. This is a picture of a hopper silo this year. Quite a few silos are now reaching 40 years plus, but a failure like this can happen with a silo only 10 years old. So inspection of the hip rings on bulk silos, really careful that you haven't got corrosion or fatigue issues with them. And if anyone wants any questions on that, I'm happy to give advice, because certainly across the world and locally in the UK, there's quite a few silo issues going on. Low level issues, corrosion around the bottom sheet of the silo. Again, carefully monitored, chip away any concrete that looks damp or wet, and just make sure that you haven't got a possibility of ring failure around the base. You see what we've done here at Camgrain with some of the silos where those bottom rings have been replaced. So summary that I could give, act promptly, don't forget the bulk is in the shed when you're very busy. Really have a good program that looks after everything all the time, however busy you are, because once an issue starts to develop, it can very easily get out of control, and fast action is essential. It clearly does make a difference on the size bulk you're looking at as well. That 100 tons is relatively easy to manage, and a very large bulk that you can't move because there's nowhere to move it to that can accept the volume is a real major issue, and the managing of those larger bulks absolutely crucial. It's done carefully. Attention to detail always pays off. Good hygiene, temperature, pest control, and keeping a clean, efficient site really does pay dividends. More than ever for this harvest, I think critical spares. Check what you need and make sure if it's really critical and it could stop the combine, ultimately you've got the spares to keep the operation running. Probably golden rules from me. Aeration, you can do a massive amount with aeration, and you can control things with aeration. If for any reason you can't get air through the bulk, that is a real good reason to move the bulk, and hence you need then somewhere to move it to. So ventilation crucial. Segregation, try and avoid putting things in the bulk that shouldn't go there, which we'd all try to do, and that comes down to careful looking at what is coming off the combine at the time, so you can avoid contaminating large bulks, for example with ergot that's come off a headland at one field. And then finally, water leaks. It's really easy to have a silo that looks fine, a flat store that looks fine, temperature readings that all show good, and then your flat store is leaking water through the floor somewhere, or the silo is leaking through the roof, and spotting that is much more difficult. So real careful inspection when both systems are empty, or the silo or flat store is empty pre-harvest, and go and have a look inside when it's pouring the rain and see if you can see any issues that way. And then very careful monitoring when you empty the flat store. Does it look like great water has been coming in through the floor anywhere? Some great guides available now for grain storage, and there's some great data on the World Wide Web as well. And certainly I'll be really pleased to answer any questions. That's a picture of our Cambridge site, just to wrap up, and the two flat stores you can see there in the front there, around 50,000 tons each, and they've got a great benefit of underfloor extraction on those, which enables us to monitor the bulks well, and then we've got plenty of silos as well. So that's it from me. Sorry if I've overrun slightly.
No, that's perfect, Philip. Thank you so much. Lots of really useful principles in there, and some really useful tips to be thinking about ahead of harvest as well. Thank you very much. And we've got some questions coming in, so anybody out there that's got questions based on what Philip said, please do put them in the questions box and we'll put them to Philip at Martin spoken. If you did want to download the handouts, there should be a little tab on your kind of side of your screen that says handouts, and we've added onto there the grain storage guide, the pest poster, the safe storage calculator, some of the things that Philip's mentioned there as well. So do feel free to go on and download those, they'll be available for the duration of the webinar. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Philip. We'll bring you back in a minute, but we'll hand over to Martin now. And Martin's going to talk us through the pest management and insect pests kind of things to consider. So, Martin, if we've got your slides hopefully ready to go, and then we'll hand over to you to do it. So, Martin is the main man in charge of Dealey Environmental Ltd, based over in East Anglia, and is going to talk us through fascinating through some of the things to consider on insect pests. So over to you. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Hopefully you can hear me all right. And yeah, I'll talk you through the wonderful world of bugs, see if we can bust some myths tonight. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm keeping an eye on the attendees to see if there's a mass exodus after Philip's talk. It is fascinating, do hang on. Yeah, I run Dealey Environmental down in Suffolk. We have a large fumigation team here, and we see every day of the year what happens when things go wrong in grain storage. And so we try and take that and reverse engineer it and see if we can make things go right for people. And that's basically all we do in the fumigation team. We've been going since the 50s. I took over in 2010, 2011, something like that. So I've been doing this 10 years, but I've been in the business since I was 16. So I've been looking at bugs all that time. About 10 years before I took over, we lost the wonderful Central Science Laboratories up in Sandhurst at York, and that was where all of the UK's in-house research was done. It was a wonderful place, a big loss indeed, and because we weren't doing it in-house, I thought the best thing to do was hit the road, Jack, and so now I travel the world going to what I love to call geek conferences, where lots of strange scientists join up every year and then discuss what they've been doing over the year, and you hear some incredibly outlandish stories from some of the strange people there. I've been trying to kill them with lasers, I've been putting them in the microwave, that sort of thing. Really nothing is off the paper for them. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to do a bit on the myths because there are a lot of myths that follow pest insects around, and if we can bust some, it's all about knowing your enemy. So the more knowledge you have, the more power you have over them. Teresa made me include the pest insect slides, which is probably a good thing, so we know what we're looking at. And I've got a few for you here. The Angoumois grain moth is the moths are less common for rejection because they tend to be ground up on outloading, but we do still get them. Foreign grain beetle, hairy fungus beetle. Grain weevil is the one that everyone recognizes. You've got Indian meal moth there. Flower beetle, grain mite, not technically an insect, but hey ho. We've got grain beetle there, rust red grain beetle, and sawtooth grain beetle. You may recognize some of them. It's very important to determine which insect you're looking at so you know how to handle them. Some of them can be done entirely DIY, just with a bit of stirring up, but phone call is always the best way forward to get that advice. So the questions I wish to address in this talk is where they come from, which is very important, and why they get into your store, how to stop them, probably the most important bit, and why should you care? It's also fairly crucial. So let's go. I'll be talking quickly so I stay within time. If anybody's got any questions, or if something I say is not clear or you completely disagree with it, do stick a question in the chat and I'll be more than happy to go for it. So little introduction to post-harvest losses here. This is from the FAO, the Federation of Agriculture. No, God, I've got it wrong. It's the FAO. It's part of the UN, and they know their stuff. They're the fedora-wearing scientists that go around the world looking at how to improve agriculture and how to cut down on post-harvest losses. Obviously, hunger is closely associated to conflict, and so the UN has a vested interest in the same things that we do, keeping post-harvest losses down. So with the blue line, the developed countries, and as you can see, it's a remarkably high post-harvest loss, almost 35% for developed countries. And it makes you think, where on earth is that post-harvest loss coming from? And just to calm everybody down, the next chart is loss at different stages. So we go from the bottom here, the on-field stuff, the stuff that you guys are doing, into the handling and storage. And this is where you guys come in, and this is where we can really cut down on those post-harvest losses. And then this is the larger four bars where we deal with it. We can't do anything about the giant blue line of consumption. it's people throwing it away. That's mostly what causes our post-harvest losses. But in handling and storage, what we're focusing on today, 2.5% is still a massive number. And with the technology that we have and the science that we have in this country, and most important of all, the funding that we have in this country, there's no need for that 2.5% to be there. So if we're going for the experts in this, the AHDB, they predict a whopping 2021 production of 14.7 million tons for wheat on its own. So if you take a 2.5% crop production loss in this bit, the handling and storage bit, that's 36 million pounds to the farming industry for wheat alone. And the first bit is where you put in all of your inputs as well. So it's genuine money lost. So you know, it's diesel, it's AdBlue, it's all of the chemicals that you put on to nurture this stuff to maturity. And yeah, it's just being lost in the storage stage. So we're here to try and get that down to as close to 0% as possible. You probably don't need me to tell you about the financial loss from storage insects. Of course, there's the transport returns, which are getting absolutely whacking, from a few hundred quid to the thousands, depending on how many lorries are being sent back. You've got the fumigation costs, which can go up to the thousands as well. And of course, there's a loss of quality, which can considerably hit profit margins. And insects are sure to do everything that they can to keep that loss of quality there, because that's the habitat that they most thrive in. So I'm going to get into the myths now. Don't forget to ask questions if you want to in the chat. Let's go. Myth number one, they only live in grain stores. This is a whopper. I'm going to start with the biggest. They unfortunately don't only live in grain stores, and I'll tell you why. Mostly it's a problem of timing. So they asked the boffins at Oregon State University if they could work out how long it takes for a species to develop and stabilize. And here's a picture of a boffin. I have absolutely no idea who he is, or if even he works at Oregon State University. I just found it on the internet, sorry. But they came up with the answer of 1 million years. So it takes 1 million years for a species to evolve and stabilize. So if you compare that to the lifespan of farming, farming's only been around for 12,000 years. So, you know, we've got these wonderful hieroglyphs of the original farmer there. And he's thinking in 12,000 years, this will be fun. I'll have the archers, I'll have air-conditioned cats. But clearly, the bugs were here before we invented the technology that they could infest. So, you know, before we put up grain stores, there were grain store insects around. And that's what makes a pest after all. It's human activity creating an ideal habitat for something to get stuck into. So I'm going to do you a quick story just to underline this point. This is a couple of pictures of grain insects nowhere near a grain store. So I was out bug hunting on a weekend, as I tend to do. This one was in Thetford Forest, peeled back some bark, and what did I find? Cryptolestes ferrugineus. And this was in the middle of, if you're not familiar with Thetford Forest, it's the largest man-made plantation in the UK, apparently. That's rust red grain beetle, which is confusing because it's nowhere near grain. But then if you look at the Latin name, which everybody should, it's all about knowing your enemy after all. The binomial nomenclature, the Latin names, can tell you an awful lot about the behavior and the origin of the species that you're looking at. And the name actually translates into lined phloem beetles. So these are bark beetles. They're nowhere near grain. So that's where I found the bugs, where the big red arrow is. And then the nearest grain stores, one was 5 kilometers away and one was 8 kilometers away. So clearly they were living very happily, creating themselves a nice family life miles away from any grain store. So that's myth number one, hopefully busted. They don't just live in grain stores, they are around and about. And so you've got to consider what is around your grain store that may actually be encouraging an insect infestation to build up. We call it infestable material, stuff that is around the grain store that they then might go, oh, there's plenty of lovely smelling grain in there that's at exactly the right temperature. We'll move in there rather than being out here. So removing waste quickly is a massive thing, or do it a long way away, set light to it. I'm not sure if you can do that anymore, but you know, it would get rid of the bugs. Do get rid of your waste and move it away from the grain store as far away as you can. And also grain spills, that sort of thing. It's just because it's outside doesn't mean that the bugs aren't going to be then transporting themselves inside. Everything around the grain store needs to be clear. If there's any old rotten wood, as you can see from the rust red grain beetle there, you can be creating a habitat even when there's no grain outside the grain store. Don't use old straw bales as dividers. That's one thing where if we go and see an infestation, we see that there's straw bales being used actually anywhere near the grain store, that you can go and dig into it, and then you sieve out a bit of the old straw, then you can find grain bugs more often than not. And then consider the good old fire break around it as well. You know, having the crushed concrete barrier. Insects don't like going over an exposed bit because they'll be eaten by a bird or something. So those are the 4 things to consider for myth number 1. Let's go myth number 2. So this is another whopper. It's a new store, so there's no need to spray it. Lots of people ring up and say, well, you can do our stores. We've got a new one, but there's no need to do it because it's new. There won't be any bugs there. We already know that bugs live outside and then move into the grain store. So my question is always, if that's true, if it's a new store and so there's no need to spray it, why do we do so many fumigations in new grain stores? And that is the case every single year. We do a whopping amount of fumigations where things have gone badly wrong in a brand new store. And it was a question that always puzzled me. And so asking dear old Dr. Dealey, who was the founder of this company, he came back with a glib and pithy response. Insects do not respect age, architecture, or beauty. And whenever he had a glib or pithy response, it usually meant that either he wanted me to work it out himself, or he didn't know. Not sure which one in this case. But this is one from the Geek conferences. There's one of my entomology heroes, Dr. Frank Arthur, did a study in 2015. They've got this incredible facility in Kansas where they basically play around with grain, play around with bugs, and give them a poke. And the results are fantastic. So he got a load of new concrete into Petri dishes and just set it in there, and then sprayed it with an airbrush with the insecticide. It's one of the scale up, scale down experiments that are so useful. And they found that the insecticide that had gone onto new concrete, that it wasn't treated effectively. If they got old concrete and they got a core out of an old store, and then they treated that, then it was treated very well. And they were adding the insecticide according to the label recommendations. And they have these wonderful microscopes which actually track insects, which is what you can see on the left-hand side there. And the new concrete, the insects didn't slow down at all. There was almost no efficacy of the insecticide at all. So the solution to this is you've got to consider whether you're low volume or high volume spraying here. On the left, that's a low volume spray that's coming out as a mist. On the right, that's a high volume spray that is coming out with a lot of water in it. So you're essentially soaking the concrete so that you're getting enough insecticide in there to create a barrier. And the problem with the new concrete is if you've got low volume, it all just gets sucked into the side, and you might as well not do it. We've also got some studies going on in the UK, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So with myth number 2, here are your 4 things to consider. You always treat a new store if you have any sort of insect risk. But if you are doing it, do go high volume. Use a lot of water and really crack on with it. Oh, have I just lost myself? Can you still see that? Oh dear.
Oh, it's just come off there, but we could see it up till then. Do you want me to start running it on my end?
No, you'll be fine. I'm sure that was just a little gremlin. So do go high volume and absolutely soak that concrete, but don't go over the dosage rate.
I'm not seeing your slides now. Let me just quickly pass you don't have to accept this, Teresa, then I'll pass back to you, Martin. Now, let's see if that works, but otherwise I can run them on my end.
Sorry, everybody. How's that? Can you see it, Christian?
Not just yet. I'm just seeing if it might be a bit slow. Teresa, are you getting them? No, it's not showing mine. I think if you're happy with it, Martin, I might just start running it from mine, if that's all right, and you just give me the next slide. Cool.
No problem whatsoever. There'll be lots of slide, everybody. My apologies. So another thing to consider when you're going high volume, if you're doing it in an old store and you're high volume spraying, and this is what a lot of contractors do, is they just come in with basically a pressure washer and they absolutely blast it with low volume spray. They stick a lot of water in there, which creates a lot of damp, and so you actually create a lot of fungus, a lot of fungal growth, which is something that a lot of these insects absolutely adore. And so you've got 6 weeks of life in your insecticide, and then when that's gone, you've still got the fungus left behind, which you created with your insecticidal spray, and so you're actually creating more of a problem. So if it's an older store, then low volume is actually much more effective. And then post-harvest treatments, doing the old envelope treatment over the top, it's something that we love doing here. Slide. Yay. Myth number 3, insects get into grain stores on the backs of rodents. This is something that I heard in a webinar really recently, and I was completely bemused by it. And I have heard it before. It's almost as if the insects are tiny Napoleons and they're saddling up rats and away they go on the backs of them. I've got a picture of a fairy there, I'm not sure why, but on the backs of rodents. And I think I know where this myth has come from. Slide, please. I've given it the Dealey cow pat of approval because it just is some special nonsense. That's all you need. So something you need to know about rats is they spend most of their time cleaning. And I've got a slightly spurious gif here. Obviously, they don't clean with shampoo, but they spend most of their time methodically cleaning themselves. The only time that they're not methodically cleaning is when they get slightly excited and it's post-coital and they mop up any protein that's left behind after that. Never mind, I didn't say it. You can observe it yourself. A lot of the times the rats get into fights and they lose an eye. And so you can creep up on them if you get on the right side, which is excellent fun. But they sit there grooming, and that's pretty much all they do when they're not running around and finding mates and eating. So yeah, to consider that there might be insects on their back, which that they are then bringing into a store, I'm not entirely sure that it's a good claim to make. And they're also omnivorous, they're polyphagous, they're going to love an insect. They love eating insects themselves. So I think this myth came from, slide please, Christian. The miracle of translocation. Here we go. So on the left here, we've got a rat's face, and you can see the puffy old cheek. It's kind of like a hamster. It sticks loads of stuff in there, and then it takes it away and it plonks it down somewhere else. And that's what they call translocation if they are wanting to sound clever. But you can see on the right here, that's a mother rat on a load of pups and all of the crapola that she's brought with her, creating, yes, that infestable material. That picture is taken down the side of an air tunnel in a grain store, and that is perfect insect infestation. So I think this has actually come from somebody just misunderstanding, somebody saying it's on the back of a rodent infestation rather than on the back of an actual rodent. Myth busted, hopefully. Next slide, please. So yeah, obviously, this is something you consider every day. Of course you do. Is your grain store rodent-free? Have you done your rodent proofing? There's loads of great products out there, and they're available to all. So to rat-proof a grain store is actually a lot of fun if you put your mind to it and you're up for the effort. It is quite a lot of work. Have you cleaned under the floors is a massive thing. There may be mouse infestation that has dragged grain down into the floors, and same with the air tunnel as well. And cleaning into the nooks and crannies where those pesky rodents may have been hiding. Slide, please. Myth number 4, smokes are all you need. Some people do just use smokes. And it's an uncomfortable position to be in. Let me tell you why. Next slide. Smokes are absolutely fantastic. Don't get me wrong. They are a great thing to do, but they have a very, very low residual action. So they're brilliant for knocking down insects. They're great for killing the adults. Sometimes the larvae, not quite so much, but sometimes the larvae as well that are hanging around in the store. But they're no good for actually protecting the store. Whereas if you have a spray-on chemical, especially an oil-based one, you've got your 6 weeks, worst case scenario, you've got 6 weeks protection. The benefit of this, of course, is there's no damp as well, and so you're not getting that fungal growth. But the ideal way to use smokes is actually to spray first and smoke afterwards. So get your grain store smoke out after you've treated it. And what it actually does is aggravate the insects. It pushes them out of all of the nooks and crannies, and we call it a flushing treatment. So you can actually get them out and onto the good stuff that you've laid down before. You've got to remember as well that you're dealing with all life stages here. So if you just use smokes, you're not doing anything to kill eggs whatsoever. So in a couple of weeks' time or a couple of days' time, depending on what sort of temperatures we're dealing with, you may have insects hatching out, and there's no residual protection there for you if you have just used smokes. Next slide, please. So is your store completely clean? So are there any insects that are hiding out in nooks and crannies where the smoke can't penetrate? If the store isn't completely clean, there's no penetrative action there at all. Has the grain been treated in all the cracks and crevices? If not, treat and then smoke pushes them out of all of the cracks and crevices. Smoking after treatment, I don't know, I've never looked. Are you overdosing or underdosing? You've got to do the maths. So look at your smoke canister before you light the wick, and you've got to do the maths. If you overdose, it's bad news. It leaves a bit of a smut behind, which is not exactly food safe. And if you're underdosing, you may not be killing anything at all. So you've got to make sure that you know the cubic meterage of your grain store and make sure that you're applying the correct amount of smokes to do the whole thing. Next slide, please, Christian. Myth number 5, field chemicals are the same as store chemicals. This one sprung to mind because I've had farmers say to me, oh, you're only putting alpha cypermethrin in there, and they seem a little bit laissez-faire, a little bit blasé about it. Next slide, please. I want to tell you about the magic ingredient that goes into the store chemicals. It's something that you're not allowed to use on the field because it would be environmentally devastating. So on the left there, you've got a grain storage chemical based on alpha cypermethrin. On the right there, you've got a field chemical, which is based on alpha cypermethrin. What's the difference? Slide, please. It's piperonal butoxide. It's the magic ingredient that goes into most of these storage chemicals. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you a little bit about piperonal butoxide. For short, people call it PBO. That's what it looks like. Keep clicking away, Christian, and we'll get there. It stops the MFO system from working in insects. The MFO system is basically what insects do to break things down. So if they have any sort of toxin, then they will metabolize it very quickly using these enzymes. So the PBO actually puts chewing gum in the lock, is the way I like to describe it. Chewing gum in the lock of the MFO, and it stops it from functioning at all, which means you only need a very small amount of insecticide for it to build up in the insect system, because it can't metabolize it. So things exposed to PBO, they can't metabolize any toxins effectively, and of course you're introducing a great new toxin into their ecosystem. The thing about this is if you get covered in your field chemical, then a couple of hours later you're piddling it up the side of the sprayer. But if you get covered in a store chemical, it's a significant amount more dangerous because PBO is effective on mammals, not as much as insects, but it is still effective. So next slide, please. It makes things a little more dangerous when you're spraying yourself. Is your PPE up to spec? It's always written on the can of the chemical, so just read that, follow the instructions exactly, and you'll be spot on. If you have a contractor spray your stores, are they using a PBO? That's something you can ask them, make a note of it now. Are you clear on the exclusion times? They should be putting a sticker up on the wall and saying you need to stay out of the store for this long. And that is quite important, not to go wandering in to put your nose in the air and see if it's working. It's very important to keep these things out of your system. We've had biochemists come down here and test our urine, and the stuff does stay there for a while. Do you need an ERA? That's an environmental risk assessment. Are you conscious of the other things that may be killed by the PBO? Next slide, please, Christian. Myth number 6, moisture is all that matters. I think I have a biblical reference. If you go forward, here he comes, here's Moses. Thou shalt store at 15%. Next slide, please. So for a lot of these bugs, temperature is all that matters. And I'm going to go back to Cryptolestes here. Cryptolestes is the one that we had in Thetford Forest, if you remember, and the name actually means fungus thief or mold thief. So they are actually after a really moldy environment, which is what they thrive in, hence the rotten wood situation. But there was a test done in 1998 by Dave Flynn and somebody Hagstrom, I can't remember. And they essentially put an aquarium heater in the middle of some grain, and then to see what the bugs would do. And this is what these sort of targets are here. On the bottom right, there's no temperature gradient at all, so they had the heater turned off. And then on the top left, they've got the highest temperature gradient. So it's 42 degrees in the middle and 20 degrees around about the outside. And you see the draw that the temperature has to bring them in. But what really blew my mind on this one was the bottom left one, which is there's only a temperature differential of 1 degree, and they still came into the middle and all clustered around. Temperature is extremely important. And when I go and see a farmer and they say, I'm not sure why I've got bug problems, everything is stored at 15% or lower, it's not the percentage of moisture that they should be worrying about, it's the degrees of temperature that they should be worrying about when it comes to insects. Next slide, please. Keep you clicking. God, I spent hours on this graphic, as you can tell. So you've got your grain store there. It's 1 degree warmer inside. You put it only needs to be 1 degree warmer to encourage things inside. If you're after harvest and it's coming straight off the back of a combine, then you're looking at something that's around about 30 degrees C. And so it's going to be significantly warmer than the insects are at night, especially. So if you've got some sort of infestable material on the left here, I've got a skip filled with stuff. It could be anything, different cleanings from a combine. It could be that old straw bale. It could just be some old rotten wood or something like that that is close by. They will say, saddle up the rats, Napoleon, we are off. and they'll get into your grain store. It only has to be 1 degree different. Next slide, please. So things to consider: cool your grain as quickly as possible. In the HGCA guide, they had some really very ambitious targets for cooling your grain, and it is becoming more difficult as the autumns become warmer and winters seem to be getting later. But cooling is 100% important when it comes to controlling insects early on. You've already heard from the last talk how quickly insects can get involved. Post-harvest treatments as well is the envelope treatment that we talk about. You've treated the sides of the grain store, you treated the floor of the grain store, you've put the grain in, and you've got a big open top that insects can go into with no protection at all. It's all around the sides. And so treating over the top of the grain is a perfectly legitimate thing to do to create that envelope of protection. Also, are you monitoring for insects in the grain? You've got to have it in your arsenal. You've got your pitfall traps, you have sieves. I can't believe that nobody has sieves. They're absolutely marvelous things to have. You go through the grain and just sieve the surface of it. And then limiting the infestable material outside the store. Have I mentioned that before? It is important. Crack on, please, Christian. Quick fire myths. I'm running out of time, so these are going to be quick fire. Let's go. Number 7, you can't treat organic stores. No, not true. You can very well, and there's some effective, very organic things out there. We've got natural plant oils on the left. That's chrysanthemum oil, marvelous stuff. Diatomaceous earth on the right. Diatoms are sea creatures, tiny sea creatures, usually little babies, and they're called diatoms because they're normally perfectly symmetrical, so it's diatom, two split in half. Yeah, this is from dried out ancient seabeds, and they're open cast mined, and they get pretty much pure diatomaceous earth out, just the skeletons of diatoms. And when these skeletons are dried out, they're almost pure silicon dioxide, which is an extremely effective desiccant against bugs, but it is entirely natural and entirely organic. Next slide, please. Repeat offenders of the grain store, sorry, the weighbridge rejections. All insects in grain stores are bad. Not true. So on the left here, you've got some clover weevil. It's a field pest. They are everywhere after harvest, and we get called out so much to come and look at them. And we say, don't worry, just sit on it for a bit. They will die. But you've got to have the correct ID first things first. You've got predatory mite. They're actually very useful things to have in a grain store. They kill things like book lice and predate on them. And then everybody's worst enemy on the right-hand side, the old cabbage stem flea beetle. These are the things that go everywhere at harvest time and get stuck in your beard, and everybody hates them. Next slide, please. So none of those are actually rejectable insects, but we still see loads of rejections for them at weighbridges when there's some students in there or somebody who doesn't quite know what they're doing, and you've already paid for return haulage. It's a pain. It gets emotional. So what we've got is an insect ID service. All you need is a rigid container, something like this, a jam jar. Pop it along to us. We'll give it an ID. Send us a photo. We'll give it an ID. If you're up for doing some DIY ID, then cool, that's a mouthful. Then you can use the rule of thumb. If you put your thumb on it and it squishes, it's usually not a bad insect. If it gets up and shakes itself off and walks around, it's usually a bad insect. But we do have some flow charts that are available on our website as well, free to all, where you can follow some fairly simple steps to ID your bugs. Next slide, please. So once harvest is in, the job is done. That's something that might be slightly insulting. It appears to be a prevailing attitude that the harvest is done, we're on to the next thing. You've got to look after that stuff that's in the store. So I've already mentioned envelope treatments. I've already mentioned pitfall traps. They aren't very expensive, very much worth getting in. You've got one on the top and one just underneath the grain surface. And you put them every 10 meters there. They're marvelous things to have, and all you have to do is open them up and see what's inside, and they're really rather effective. Actually, HGCA did an extremely good study on this in the 80s, and those are the most effective pitfall traps rather than the little proby ones. And then sieves, a 2 mil sieve, I think it's the most fantastic thing you can have. If you sieve all of the high points of your grain, you get a really good idea of what's living in there. It would surprise you how much stuff lives in grain. Next slide, please. Low temps will kill them. That's a big whopper of a myth again. So if you freeze them, yeah, maybe. You can put them in a freezer and they will die. But then you have all sorts of problems with condensation, as we found out with trying to treat organic products this way. The condensation then creates mold growth, and it leads to a problem with the product quality. If you go anything less than freezing, then they don't die, they just go diaphoral. They fall asleep basically, and they're active down to about 5 degrees C. So you do have to get extremely cold for them to even go diapausal. So we've got some weevil in the fridge here. We've kept them there for 2 years. They're still not dead. We've only lived for a year, so they just go to sleep. They literally go completely moribund, and it's like they press pause on their life. So cryogenics are real. Go to the next slide, please. Putting it through the dryer will kill them. This is myth number 10. It's the last one. Yeah, if you heat up any insect at 56 degrees, you'll denature the proteins in there. And if you do it for an hour, it'll kill them. But the heat of the dryer is too inconsistent to do this 100%. Lots of people try this, and all it does is aggravate the insects, and they go everywhere. So you end up with lots of infestation where you did have a very localized infestation. It is possible to give it a go, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. It almost always doesn't work. And I've got Ray Mears there because I always remember him making jerky in the Arctic. What your dryer is designed to do is to create dry air going through so that you're drying out your grain, you're drying out the jerky. How can you do that just based on hot temperature? It's not really designed just to heat up your grain. So yeah, that's my lot for the myth busting. If you go on to the next slide, please, Christian, that's me. That's how you get in contact with me. You can find us anywhere on social media with the @Dealey Pest tag. But do please stick some questions in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Absolutely fantastic, Martin. Thank you. I've got lots of messages of people just saying how they loved, sitting through both of your presentations. They've been absolutely brilliant. Lots of myth busting going on there. So thank you to both. And we've got lots of questions coming through as well. So I think we might do a rapid fire question round for you. Just a quick note before we go into that, if you would like basis and roso points, there is still the opportunity to do that, and then we'll make a record of those. So if you pop your details in the questions box, we can do that. So there's a mixture of questions here. I'll try and kind of do them to you both at the same time to keep you involved. But there's no particular order to them, and you've got some great ones here. So the first one for you, Philip. Do you think hotspot spears have a place and work well, or are they a bit of a firefighting tool?
Can you hear me okay? My speaker's on, is it? Yeah. Well, I suggest they are a firefighting tool, but you're certainly glad to have it if you're fighting that battle. Uniformity in the temperature in the bulk is crucial. When insects get fired up, you can certainly generate some hotspots really rapidly. I've seen it many times, whether on farm or with us. They're a tool that you're pleased to have. Everybody hasn't got temperature monitoring that runs throughout the whole bulk, and there are bulks that haven't got that. But if you get a leaky roof or something dropping water on top of the bulk, and you have a hotspot fire up, find it with a temperature probe, and then if you can get a spear into it, if you haven't got underfloor ventilation, it's a good place to be. Certainly better than taking everything out the silo or the flat store if possible.
If possible, yeah, we can avoid that. Brilliant, thank you. Martin, what's the best treatment for grain mite? Christopher would like to know, please.
I was muted, I apologise. You would have thought with like 18 months of this, we would have got used to it, but hey, hey. So most fantastic thing you can do yourself is give it a stir. Always grain movement around December time, it does grain the world of good. You can actually get an 85% reduction in grain mite by just taking it out the bottom of the silo and putting it in the top. If you don't have any stirring stuff and it's in bulk, then motorbike stirrers are absolutely marvelous. Yeah, you do have to be very fit to be able to use them though, because it is a slow and arduous process. Without the stirring, you've got the option of moving it from one store to another. And if you are going to go down the control route, then the best control for mite is definitely physical rather than chemical. This is a long answer. I'm sorry, Teresa. Mites are older than dinosaurs, right? They've outlasted lots of species extinctions and lots of worldwide catastrophes. They've developed this thing called hypopus, which is like an extra life stage, where they essentially they do more than just go to sleep. They drop off their limbs and they go completely moribund, and they turn into a passive liver, and they have this sort of suction pad on their stomach, which just absorbs anything that hits it, and they're completely dead to the world at this point. So if you try and add an insecticide, which is a nerve agent, to something that all of its nerves have shut down, no good. You're not going to kill them all. You're going to kill some of them. The rest of them, you're going to trigger hypopus, and they think, you know, this is an old species. They think this is a drought or something like that. They've gone to sleep. They're going to outlast this drought, and then we'll crack on after that. So what you get is 10% of them coming back stronger than ever, because they're the ones more likely to go hypopal. So the best route is always physical control. We've already mentioned stirring. The other one is diatomaceous earth, which you can rake into the top of your grain. Do check with your buyer before you use it, though, because some places are a bit funny about accepting diatomaceous grain if it's been, diatomaceous earth treated grain, especially millers once the grain mill, and especially people that have smaller conveyors, because it can slow down the flow of the grain. So use with caution.
Brilliant. There we go. We literally did not know what we were going to learn about mites tonight. Look, fabulous. Thank you, Martin. Quite a specific question here, Philip. What's the best way to clean out an overhead conveyor short of taking it apart?
Depends on the type of conveyor. The simplest route is to take both end plates off, as long as you've got self-cleaning flights or reasonably self-cleaning conveyor. The issues are at both ends. So if you can take the end off, lift the end flap, or take the plate off the end of the machine, you can easily clear the end without having to strip the whole machine apart, I'd suggest. But it does depend on the conveyor manufacturer.
Great, thank you. Martin, any tips on monitoring insects in sealed bins?
Oh, that's a whopper. If you have a hatch in the top, then you can get pheromone traps. They're available on the website. Last plug, I promise. You can dangle them in on a bit of baler twine, and you check them every week. They've got this sticky pad in it, which is imbued with insect pheromones, and they're absolutely fantastic. The insects take the pheromone as a chemical command. They can't avoid that trap. If it's entirely sealed and you don't have any hatch on the top at all, then there's a couple of options for you. Number one is moving it from one silo to another, and then testing the flow of grain on the way through safely, of course. Don't stick your fingers in a conveyor. The other one is to install a couple of ports, get your welding glasses on. You don't need a very large port. It needs to be pointing upwards and sealed so that you don't get any rain going in, you don't have any grain coming out. And where would you put these ports? The insects will gather in silos at the places of highest oxygen. So it's going to be in the top of the grain and in the bottom of the grain. And those are the best places to put your port. And how do you get the grain out? It's the old Henry Hoover. You can suck a bit out using some small poly pipe to go in there, and you test your sample after that.
Lovely, thank you, Martin. There's a couple of questions here about building new stores, Philip. So the first one is about the best way to ensure flexibility of storage for crop separation. Any thoughts on that?
Is the question geared at silos or flat storage or anything particular, or
just a new storage facility? I imagine flat stores.
Well, so we've got a combination of both. The more segregation you put in, the more costly your system's going to be, period. So then it really is down to how many different crops you're growing on the farm. You've then got your choice, haven't you, is with small silos, a bulk store that you would fill, and you can lose an awful lot of space in big bulk stores if you start segregating them multiply along the length of the flat store. Our flat stores tend to have minimal segregation, and we aim to fill that bulk to maximize the use of the store. And our silos, they vary from 100 tons to 6,000 for a farm installation. The use of silos is pretty useful for the minimum use of labor, giving lots of segregation, but it has a price attached to it. So it's really what is in the budget, really, and the more segregation you add, the more costly the system will be.
Great, thanks, Philip. And just kind of following on from that, Simon here is looking at a new grain store and have the option of a traditional drying floor, silos, or a concrete floor with pedestals. Do you want to just talk us through the pros and cons of those? I mean, you've kind of just covered that in some ways, but is there anything else to add on that specifically?
Well, specifically, again, it's all down to cost. Personally, we've got underfloor ventilated flat stores. We've got flat stores with ventilation above floor. And then we've got one of our sites that's got a combination of both. So underground ductings in a concrete floor with a pedestal. We haven't really got any wooden floor grain stores at all. They tend to get battered to pieces fairly. So if I was looking at a flat store and the optimum cost balance, it would probably be something along the lines of pedestals that are plugged into ducts under the concrete floor. Just means less to smash into with a loader when you're in the shed, and the more you've got above the floor, the higher maintenance costs you're going to have every year when someone bangs into the kit that's above the floor. Our flat stores, our big flat stores, have got underfloor ventilation and an underfloor tunnel. It really comes down to cost, but top of my list wouldn't be a fancy wooden floor that are very expensive and then easily damaged with the wrong machines in them.
Great, thank you, Philip. Martin, a question here from Duncan. Should we not consider IPM and use bait bags in an empty store and then use a threshold before we consider fogging or spraying with insecticides? I imagine that's your practice, but do you want to come back to Duncan on that?
100% yes. So bait bags are, yeah, I don't like them for many reasons. You're much better off using something that's not got a food element to it. And so the sticky pheromone traps are 100% better than using something that just has a food attractant to it. Yeah, yes, absolutely. If you go to your HGCA grain storage guide, then they do have the flow chart in there. Test first. If you got bugs, then you treat. IPM is absolutely crucial, and it's all about controlling them physically once the grain is in the store, because so many people have found it difficult to do that. There's a lot of people taking the prophylactic approach, but unfortunately that would be contrary to the COSH regulations set for us by our beloved government. So yeah, it's an excellent point and very well made.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to have another one for you here, Martin. How would you recommend you treat a continual flow dryer?
Okay, so it used to be acrylic dust. That was the wonder, it really was. So you've got two options here. Number one, you can use an admixture and then send admixed grain through it, and it sort of flushes it out. Number two, you can also blast diatomaceous earth very, very handily. We use some sort of I don't know what you call them, some dusting machines that just make a mess, and you blast it in one end and you wait until it comes out the other. Sorry, I went a bit agricultural on you there.
Oh, brilliant. Right, there's a couple of kind of specific questions here. There's a couple of specific questions. Jack's got one, Melissa's got quite a specific one. There's a few in here that I might just follow up with you both kind of directly about their kind of situations. Duncan's got one. Nigel's got one that I wonder if other people have got a similar problem. So what's the best way to clean a 100-ton hopper bottom silo? They can't get into it with ladders and access for washing out is difficult. Any magic solutions, either of you?
You go first, Martin.
Yes, they are extraordinarily difficult. People have, you can try from the top with compressed air blowing from the top downwards. There's a guy in Norfolk I know who's made the most incredible scaffold tower that sort of balances on hopper bottom silos. But as you've already seen from Philip's presentation, the foundations might not be as secure as you think. I have been to places where they have a sort of couple of sections of steel that they put in, and it sort of holds them up. Going into a silo is always a dangerous business, and especially when your flooring isn't great. So I haven't given you the best answer. Compressed air from the top, I think, is all I can give you.
Okay, and that's a good segue on to seal, Philip, because I've got a question about that when you can add in anything there. So there's a question from Nicholas here. What do you use to seal around the edge of concrete bunkers where it's shrunk?
Okay, there's a couple of points there. Just briefly to go back to the hopper silos, they are a complete nightmare to do, and whatever you do, really health and safety needs to be at the front of everything. Really well thought out how you clean out a hopper silo. There are different techniques, and we've got hopper silos that vary from 1,000-ton, 2,000-ton hopper down to a 100-ton hopper. They're a real challenge how to do it. Rope access is one way to do it, but if anyone would like any advice on what we do individually on silos, I'd certainly be, offline prepared to take a call and give some guidance. It's possible to take bottom sheets off these hoppers and then go in through the bottom with various different techniques, but safety absolutely crucial with that type of silo. As far as sealing round flat stores that have shrunk, there's various different sealers that we use to seal around the base of silos. Seeker is one, but there's various different types of rubbery type solution, and it depends how much the structure has actually moved. If you're talking of a structure that's moved slightly, then the sealing technique will be different to that one where you've actually got something that's structurally gone on with the grain balling. And again, that's advice from professionals that build the facilities is usually the best route.
Brilliant, thank you, Philip. An interesting one for you here, Martin. So saying here, always taught the good virtues of cleaning kit. Could or would you fumigate a store while the machinery's in it?
Depends what you mean by fumigate. So a lot of people say fumigate when they mean treat. So fumigation is using gas, whereas treating is using an insecticide or spray. So I'll answer both of those. Number one, with fumigation, most of the time when you're using gases on grain, it's going to be phosphine gas, which corrodes copper, and so you have to be very careful of any electronics, and you have to make sure that the grain is 100% well sealed, and you've got a trusted contractor doing it if you are fumigating grain with expensive kit right next door. Number two is insecticidal treatments, if that's what we mean by fumigating. I don't see any problem with it at all, to be honest.
That's good to know. Brilliant. There's a comment here from Andrew about pest ID by merchants, and I know we actually had a conversation about this before we came on the webinar tonight. It's just a comment to say about loads being rejected, for things that weren't necessarily needing rejecting. And I love your rule of thumb, the squishable or not thing. I'll be definitely using that. But yeah, it's kind of a general thing, and I know training and advice is available, and it, like you recognise, Philip, it's important that everybody there that's involved in it is up to date. So right, I think I've got quite specific questions here from Andrew, from David, from Duncan, from Jack, from Melissa, that I'll kind of keep and just send them through to you guys, so don't worry, your questions will be answered. But one question to finish on, from Richard here, with climate changing globally, will higher temperatures have an impact on pest numbers and species going forward, Martin? That's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, we've already seen them going north. We're seeing more fumigations north of the M62 than we ever have done. And yeah, well, I mean, we all feel it. I think the best way I've heard it described is an old friend behaving strangely. That we all know allegorically that the weather is changing, and yes, it is making a big difference. Gone are the days of ice skating on the Thames. Most of these bugs are tropical in origin. You're again, sorry to be a bore, but do look at the Latin names. If you look at our most popular one, the sawtooth grain beetle, it's called Oryzophilus surinamensis, which means the rice lover from Suriname. It gives you an idea of where it is. If you don't know where Suriname is, it's just next to Brazil. It's tropical, right? So all of these tropical insects have hit our shores after containerized transport became a thing. And yeah, they're here to stay. They've got temperatures that agree with them very well indeed.
Brilliant. So just to finish, if these guys are going to do one thing before harvest, what would that top tip be, Philip?
Make sure you got the spares you need.
He's nervous. You can tell he's an operations director, can't you? Great, thanks, Philip. And Martin?
Make sure you clean your stores early, because the life cycle of a bug is 6 weeks. If you can get that infestable material away from there, then you've got yourself 6 weeks of a fallow period inside the store, and you've got something that's not attractive as a habitat.
You're going to be busy in the next few weeks, Martin. Just as well, we're not going to have an early harvest this year. Everybody's got just about enough time. Brilliant. Thank you both so much. It's been an absolutely fascinating evening. We've all learned so much, and I think we're all going to go and look up all sorts of new things. So just to finish off tonight, there is just a bit more information out there if you need it. So the resources, as I said, were on the handouts. If you haven't got them, all available on our website, either to download or you can get the hard copies as well. I know, Martin, you know, those posters, well, I imagine, Philip, you've got them up in Camgrain as well, the inspecting grain and insects and mites. If you haven't got one that's not on your wall, you know, please do feel free to order it. It's there. They're a great resource available to you. So the next slide, Christian. There are also other kind of tools available from AHDB. I thought I'd mention the Harvest Toolkit. So all of the things that you might need if you've got harvest students coming on farm, everything is in one place. If you Google AHDB Harvest Toolkit, it's got links to the recommended list harvest results, it's got links to kind of the grain storage stuff, it's got links to all sorts of things on there. So it's a one-stop shop to definitely have a look at. I'll just mention as well the business impact calculator, off topic completely, but just kind of a key thing that we probably all need to be thinking about at the moment. Plug in what your income for BPS is at the moment and close your eyes while you see the drop off over the next few years. But if we're thinking about investing in grain storage and we're thinking about the future of where we are, then these are all things that we need to be considering. So next slide. So just a couple of people at AHDB. Dan Bandari is our lead on cereal product quality and kind of behind that. So if you've got kind of specific questions or want to know about research on a specific thing, Dan's your man. Harry Henderson has also been working with NFU Energy to do a review of grain storage guidance and information. That's just due to be released shortly, and we're looking at kind of updating a lot of the stuff that's out there for you. So watch this space. There's a podcast that Michelle, my colleague's done, which will come out on Friday, that's kind of going into that in a bit more depth as well. So I think all that leaves me to say is there's a few other things coming up this summer. Our strategic cereal farm activities start on Friday with updates from our East West Scotland farms, and to launch our new farm for the South with David Miller. You should have got an email with the details. The details are all available online as well. And then we've got workshops coming up every Friday in June. So do sign up to them, and they're going to be really good sessions as well. Next slide, Christian. Arable connections, so we're going to bring the recommended list trials to life. So there's a recommended list open days happening across the country that you can do, or if you'd rather log in online, there's a session next Wednesday looking at bringing those to life with information and opportunities to ask the researchers. We have also got a lot of events happening both online and on farm over the year. All of those are all available if you go onto the ahdb.org.uk/events. They're all on there, and look forward to seeing you actually out on farm in real life this year as well. Out on a business group in sunny Norfolk this morning, and it's great to be back out and about if you feel up to it. Otherwise, we're going to keep these kind of webinars going for you as well. So I think that's it from us. The session has been recorded, so if you want to go back and get into that nitty-gritty detail of what Philip's presented, or feel the enthusiasm from Martin's love of pests, you can do that again. You will get a survey that as you leave tonight, if you did get a couple of chances to just fill in those details. We do really use that to inform what we do going forward. And as ever, if you've got any questions, want to know anything else, want any kind of details that you've missed tonight, please do get in touch with me. So a huge thank you again to Philip and to Martin. It's been a fascinating evening. Hopefully it's given you a few different ideas, busted a few myths, and got you ready thinking about your stores for the season ahead and going forwards. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon.